In a quiet suburb of Seattle, the afternoon sun cast long shadows over a modest home. Sophie Miller, a 14-year-old girl, lay on her bedroom floor, her face drained of color. "Mom, it hurts," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper, clutching her stomach. Her mother, Grace, was downstairs folding laundry, humming softly to herself. The moment Sophie's cry reached her, Grace dropped everything and raced upstairs. She froze in the doorway, her heart sinking at the sight of her daughter's pale face. Sophie's eyes were squeezed shut, her breathing shallow, sweat beading on her forehead. "Sophie, honey, what's wrong?" Grace cried, dropping to her knees beside her. Sophie couldn't answer. She curled tighter, a low moan escaping her lips. Grace pressed a trembling hand to Sophie's forehead. It was clammy, cold. "Hold on, baby," Grace whispered, panic rising like a tide in her chest. Just then, a knock came at the front door. Mrs. Carter, their elderly neighbor, peered in. "Grace, I heard a scream. Is everything okay?" Mrs. Carter called, stepping inside. She saw Sophie writhing on the floor and gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mrs. Carter, she's in so much pain. I don't know what's happening," Grace stammered. "We need to get her to a hospital. Now," Mrs. Carter said, her voice firm despite her age. Grace tried to lift Sophie, but the girl whimpered, too weak to stand. Mrs. Carter darted outside, shouting, "Tom! Tom, bring your car!" Tom, a local mechanic working on his truck nearby, dropped his tools and ran over. "What's going on?" he asked, his broad frame filling the doorway. "Sophie's sick. Really sick. We need your help," Mrs. Carter urged. Without a word, Tom scooped Sophie into his arms, her slight body limp against him. Grace grabbed her purse, tears streaming down her face, and followed him to the truck. Tom sped off toward Mercy General Hospital, the engine roaring through the streets. Grace sat in the back, cradling Sophie, whispering, "Stay with me, sweetie, please." Sophie's breathing grew fainter, her hand limp in Grace's grip. The hospital was a blur of white walls and hurried voices as they arrived. "Help! My daughter needs help!" Grace shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. Nurses swarmed, whisking Sophie onto a stretcher and rushing her through the doors. Dr. Emily Hayes, a seasoned physician with steady hands, took charge immediately. "Get her to the ER! Stat!" Dr. Hayes ordered, her eyes scanning Sophie's fragile form. Grace stumbled after them, clutching Dr. Hayes's arm. "She was fine this morning." "We'll figure this out, Mrs. Miller," Dr. Hayes said, her tone calm but urgent. Sophie vanished behind the ER doors, leaving Grace trembling in the waiting area. Mrs. Carter stayed with her, rubbing her back. "She's in good hands, Grace." Grace nodded, but her eyes stayed glued to the doors, her mind racing with fear. Inside, the ER hummed with controlled chaos. Monitors beeped, voices overlapped. Sophie lay on the table, her breath shallow, pain etched across her young face. "Run a full blood panel," Dr. Hayes instructed, her brow furrowed as she worked. A nurse, David, drew blood swiftly, his hands steady despite the tension. Dr. Hayes pressed gently on Sophie's abdomen. Sophie cried out, her body jerking. "Where does it hurt, Sophie?" Dr. Hayes asked, her voice soft but insistent. Sophie whimpered, pointing weakly to her lower stomach, tears spilling over. David returned with the blood results, his face pale as he handed them over. "Doctor, Hayes, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with unease. Dr. Hayes scanned the page. Her breath caught, her eyes widening in disbelief. This This can't be right, she muttered, her hands tightening on the paper. We need an ultrasound. Now, she ordered, urgency sharpening her words. Outside, Grace paced, wringing her hands, praying under her breath. Mrs. Carter squeezed her arm. She's strong, Grace. She'll pull through. The ultrasound machine rolled in, its screen flickering to life in the dim room. Dr. Hayes moved the probe over Sophie's abdomen, her expression growing grim. The image appeared, a tiny, unmistakable shape within Sophie's small frame. David stared, stunned. She's pregnant? He whispered, barely audible. A nurse, Rachel, clasped her hands to her chest, eyes filling with tears. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly, her throat dry. She's 14 years old and pregnant. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them all. We have to tell her mother, David said, his voice shaking. Not yet, Dr. Hayes replied. I need to talk to Sophie first. Grace burst into the ER as David stepped out, her eyes wild with fear. Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay, Grace begged, clutching his sleeve. Doctor, Hayes needs to speak with you, David said, avoiding her gaze. Grace rushed inside, relief flooding her at seeing Sophie awake, though pale. But Dr. Hayes's grave expression stopped her cold, dread pooling in her stomach. Mrs. Miller, we found the cause of Sophie's pain, Dr. Hayes began gently. Grace held her breath, her hands trembling. What is it? Is she sick? Dr. Hayes hesitated, then spoke softly. Sophie is pregnant. The words hit Grace like a freight train. Her knees buckled, her vision blurring. Pregnant? She choked out, shaking her head. No, that's impossible. She's 14. I'm so sorry, Dr. Hayes said, steadying her. The tests are clear. Grace staggered to Sophie's bedside, tears streaming down her face. Sophie, honey, is this true? She whispered, her voice breaking. Sophie turned her head away, silent sobs shaking her small shoulders. Mrs. Carter entered, hearing Grace's cry, and froze in shock. Pregnant? She echoed, her voice barely a breath, her face pale. Grace gripped Sophie's hand, pleading, Sweetie, who did this to you? Sophie didn't answer. Her eyes were distant, filled with a terror Grace didn't understand. Dr. Hayes knelt beside her. Sophie, we're here to help you. You're safe now. But Sophie only trembled, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Grace's voice rose, desperate. Sophie, please, tell me who. Sophie flinched, her lips quivering, but no words came, just more tears. Dr. Hayes turned to David. Call the police. This isn't just medical. It's a crime. David nodded and hurried out, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. Outside, the sky darkened, a soft rain tapping against the hospital windows. The ER door opened, and Officer Laura Bennett stepped in, her presence steady. I'm Officer Bennett, she said, her voice calm but firm. I got a call about a minor. Dr. Hayes briefed her quietly. Sophie's 14 and pregnant. She's too scared to talk. Laura nodded, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Sophie's fragile form. Grace stood, her voice shaking. Officer, someone hurt my daughter. I need to know who. We'll find out, Laura assured her, then approached Sophie gently. Sophie, I'm here to protect you, Laura said, kneeling by the bed. Sophie peeked out from the blanket, her eyes wide, but she stayed silent. Laura softened her tone. You don't have to say anything yet. Just know I'm here. The door creaked open again. Paul, Grace's husband, and Sophie's stepfather walked in. He wore a faded jacket, his face etched with concern, or so it seemed. Grace, what's going on? I got your text, he said, his voice smooth. Grace turned, relief fleeting. Paul, Sophie's in the hospital. She's pregnant. Paul's eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Pregnant? He repeated, stepping closer. How could this happen? Laura watched him closely, her instincts prickling at his too calm demeanor. Mr. Miller, where were you today? She asked, her tone neutral but probing. At work, Paul replied quickly, meeting her gaze. I came as soon as I heard. Sophie shrank back under the blanket, her breathing quickening. Laura noticed, her suspicion deepening, but she kept her expression neutral. Sophie, can you tell me anything? Laura asked again, her voice gentle. Paul leaned in. Sophie, come on, say something. What happened? Sophie flinched violently, pulling the blanket over her head, trembling harder. Grace caught the reaction, her heart pounding. Paul, give her space. Laura stepped between them, her voice firm. Mr. Miller, please step back. Paul raised his hands, smiling faintly. I'm just worried about her. I'd like to speak with Sophie alone, Laura said, her eyes locked on his. Paul hesitated, then nodded. Fine, I'll wait outside. As he left, his glance lingered on Sophie, sending a shiver down Grace's spine. Laura sat beside Sophie, her voice a whisper. Sophie, it's just us now. Sophie's sobs grew louder, her small frame shaking under the blanket. He'll hurt me, she whispered, her voice so faint Laura barely caught it. Who, Sophie? Laura pressed gently, her heart racing. Sophie bit her lip, tears streaming. Paul, it's Paul. The air thickened. Grace gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, horror dawning. Dr. Hayes steadied her as Grace staggered, whispering, No, no, it can't be. Laura's jaw tightened, fury simmering beneath her calm exterior. Sophie, you're so brave, she said softly. He won't touch you again. I swear it. Grace collapsed into a chair, sobbing. How did I not see this? Dr. Hayes knelt beside her. This isn't your fault, Grace. We'll get her through this. Laura stood, pulling out her radio. I need backup, suspect in custody now. Outside, Paul paced the hall, his calm facade slipping as he sensed the shift. Laura emerged, her voice cold. Paul Miller, you're under arrest. What? Paul snapped, stepping back. This is insane. I didn't do anything. Save it, Laura said, cuffing him as backup arrived. Sophie told us everything. Paul's face twisted, but he went silent as officers led him away. Grace rushed to Sophie, wrapping her in her arms. I'm so sorry, baby. Sophie clung to her, whispering, I was so scared, Mom. I know, Grace sobbed. I'll never let him near you again. Dr. Hayes arranged for a counselor, knowing Sophie's healing would take time. Days later, at the precinct, Laura presented the evidence. Texts Paul had deleted. Forensics recovered them. Threats, coercion, proof of his guilt undeniable. Paul sat in interrogation, his charm gone, replaced by a hollow defiance. You've got nothing, he sneered, but his voice wavered. Laura slid the file across the table. DNA matches, messages. You're finished. Paul's face paled, his fists clenching as the reality sank in. The trial was swift. Paul was sentenced to 20 years, no parole. Grace stood in court, holding Sophie's hand, tears of relief falling. He's gone, sweetie, she whispered. You're safe now. Sophie nodded, a faint smile breaking through her fear. They moved to Portland, a fresh start funded by a victim support program. Sophie started therapy, her laughter slowly returning, piece by piece. One evening, Grace gave her a sketchbook. Sophie loved to draw. For your new beginning, Grace said, kissing her forehead. Sophie hugged her tight. Thanks, Mom. I feel free. Grace smiled, tears in her eyes. We're free together. Outside, the sun set over their new home, casting a warm glow on their future. Sophie's story was a beacon. Courage could rise from the darkest pain. Grace learned a mother's love could falter, but never break. With Laura, Dr. Hayes, and a community behind them, they rebuilt. The past scarred them, but hope stitched their wounds into strength. If you like this story, please give it a like. Subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us sharing tales like this. We're so grateful. See you soon.